Good evening, everybody. My name is Tom Giroux. I'm on the board of directors for the Forest History Association of Wisconsin. I'll be working with Don Schnitzler tonight on the presentation, and you can see the title of the presentation up there. But just a little bit about the Forest History Association. Our mission is to inform, educate, archive, and publish. And so tonight we're fulfilling the inform and educate portion of our mission by hosting this webinar. If you are not a member of the Forest History Association, I'd encourage you to visit our website at www.foresthistoryassociationwi.com/membership, and you can join up there. It's relatively inexpensive, and it helps to support our programs and our mission. So I'd encourage you to do that. Tonight we have Don Schnitzler, who is a fellow genealogist like me, who had a little bit of family history and forestry and forest products. And so like me, he kind of went down the rabbit hole of forest history, and we're both big advocates for the Forest History Association of Wisconsin. So I will turn my video off and mute myself. A little bit about the technology. Just we will be taking questions at the end of the presentation. But as you're listening to Don, if you think of a question, you can pop it into the chat. So just on the bottom of your screen, put your mouse down there, hit the chat button, type your question in, and then I'll come back on at the end of the presentation, and Don and I will have a discussion and answer the questions there. If you're having any technical difficulties, you can also put that information in the chat, and I'll try to help you through the chat function through those technical difficulties. Anything I'm missing, Don?
I think you're good.
All right, I'll turn it over to Don.
All right, thank you, Tom. And thank you everybody for joining us tonight. When we were talking about what we were going to present this month for a webinar, I remembered a collection that Brad Castleberry at the UW Stevens Point Archives mentioned when he talked last year, and that was the Vallier Great Lakes logging collection of pictures. And I thought, a little bit more information about that collection would be good for all of us who are interested in forest history. And so tonight's talk is really going to do a couple things. And let's see. I'm having computer issues. Okay. Sorry about that. Anyway, what tonight's talk is going to be about, there's a slide that goes through this. And what I want to do is basically talk about who Jack Vallier is. And then you can't talk about Jack without mentioning his wife, Dorothy. And then we're going to talk specifically about the collection of photographs that he donated to the UWSP archives in 1992. And maybe we're going to do this and maybe we're not. And then
I suggest you either use the page down or the arrow buttons to move it instead of the mouse.
It's not working all at once. It worked before. We were switching them around just before we talked. Give me just half a second, everybody. Nothing's working. Okay, it moved, and I'm not sure how come, but so this is the second slide. Let's hope everybody can see that. What we're going to talk about is the images and a little bit of history that connected to the images that I've selected to show you, and then how the collection is available, how you can access this collection yourself. And then at the end, I've got a quick wrap up kind of saying what we've talked about and how you can use it. And then I have an invitation for members and non-members alike that I'd like to share with you. So first off, Jack Vallier. Jack Vallier was a high school biology teacher who got involved with the Forest History Association in 1977. He was in the organization a few years. He became a member of the board of directors, and then both he and his wife became lifetime members of the organization. Jack is probably most known in the public for his effort with the Menominee Logging Camp Museum. Jack was a big collector of things, and he collected all these tools and all of the artifacts that went into the Menominee Logging Camp Museum and then donated it to the Menominee Indian tribe. His wife and he also made a substantial donation to the UWSP in the form of about 1,200 acres of land called Tree Haven up near Rhinelander Tomahawk area. That's used as an outdoor education classroom by the UW Stevens Point. And then again, he made this donation to UWSP of logging photos. And besides that, they did lots of things to support the Forest History Association. Those that are members of the Forest History Association know that we typically hold an annual auction to raise funds for scholarships or other projects that are going on. And Jack was a major contributor to that during the time he was living. Jack died in 1996, and after his passing, there was a resolution passed by the organization, kind of a in memoriam and in appreciation for all the things that he did. As I mentioned, you can't talk about Jack without talking about his wife, Dorothy. They were quite a pair, and in 2011, Jack and Dorothy were named to the Conservation Hall of Fame. One of the major contributions I've already mentioned, Tree Haven. And then not only the land did they donate, they also donated funds to keep the operations working. They also together established an Audubon Center, the Schlitz Audubon Center on Lake Michigan, or along Lake Michigan down in North Milwaukee. And it was actually Dorothy's childhood playground, basically. Her grandfather had been the founder of the Schlitz Brewery Company, and it was land that the family owned. And in the 1970s, she saw it contributed or donated to create this center. And it's been operating as the Schlitz Audubon Center ever since. But they were big proponents of conservation and the natural resources in the state. And so the recognition in 2011 was well-deserved. What we're going to talk about, though, specifically tonight is this collection of photographs that was donated by Jack in 1992 to the UWSP archives. And he was a member of the board of directors at this time. And so he was aware that the Forest History Association of Wisconsin held or holds its archives at UWSP. And he was also aware of the forestry program at the College of Natural Resources. And so when he decided to donate the collection of images, he was trying to think the best fit for it and decided on UWSP as the appropriate place for those to go. The two collections, the Forest History Association and his collection of photos for logging photos, complement each other, and it ended up that that's where they would be housed. Now, when the newspaper reported, this is clipping from the Stevens Point Journal in 1992, when they reported that the collection had been donated to the UWSP archives, they said it contained several thousand images. You know, that's a lot of images. And then they described some of those images as being the interior and exterior of buildings, men at work doing various jobs, log drives, log jams, farms, homesteads. Well, they didn't mention the homesteads and homesteaders. I added that. I was one of the things that as I was going through the collection that kind of surprised me, that there were homesteads and homesteaders on the cutover land that were also included in these images. But they make the point in the newspaper article that nearly all the images of Wisconsin are of Wisconsin, Upper Michigan, and Minnesota. Now, when it comes to the Great Lakes region, we always think of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Minnesota when we talk about the Great Lakes, but technically there are 8 states in the Great Lakes states region, and I wanted to see if there were pictures from the other states, and I missed Pennsylvania, but I looked through the list, and you can see the majority of the pictures that are indexed with a name come up as either being Wisconsin, Michigan, and Minnesota. The other states might have 1 or 2, but most of them had nothing. And it also contains images from other places besides the Great Lakes states. There's California, Oregon, Washington, Maine, Canada, and I think there were a couple other stragglers out there. There was an Arizona logging picture. So there are some other places that are mentioned that I'm not going to go into here, but it's primarily records or images that are connected to forestry in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. When you arrive at the archives, you generally, right now they're asking you to schedule an appointment. So you call ahead and you tell them what you want to look at. And when you arrive there, they will have the materials that you requested out on a table or on a cart so that you can use them. And so the picture in the upper right shows the archival boxes that contain the photo collection from Jack Vallier. There are 8 boxes. Each box contains folders, most of them multiple folders. And then the images are contained in the folders and numbered. And the original donation by Jack Vallier includes his numbering system. And so when it comes to those first 7 boxes, they are numbered the way Jack had them numbered before the donation. And when I was going through it for the first time myself, what I was thinking was 1 box should be logging on the river, 1 should be railroad logging, 1 should be in the camps, in the woods, in the mills and things like that. And they're really not. They are mixed up that way. So it's a little different than what I expected, but it still works very well because there's an index available for it. Now, when it comes to the photographs themselves, on the lower picture, I opened up box 8 and I took out the first 3 pictures that I saw. And you can see that you're looking at original photos. There's some reprints in there. There are also some negatives included in the boxes or in the file folders. There's panoramic views, and then there's these reprints and enlargements of some of the pictures that are also in there. But it's a nice collection. And while the picture that I show here has a little bit of glare because I took it through the acid-free sheets that are protecting the images, they are really nice quality pictures, good detail in them. And as we go through, I hope that you'll see that there is good quality in some of these images. But I will mention that because I didn't want to mess with gloves, we didn't want to have any oils touching the original photographs. I just took I took all of the pictures through the plastic sheaths that were on them to protect the pictures. Now, as far as the index goes, the index is it's a Word document, and it's 67 pages long, and it's set up in a table format. You can see that it's got 4 columns. A box, so you have numbers 1 through 8 for the box, and then you have a folder file next or column next, which tells you which folder it is which folder the photographs are located in that box. And then the photos are given numbers. And as I mentioned already, Jack actually numbered the first 700 and some pictures. And so they're in sequential order, the way the archives received them. The ones that are above the 700, and I think it's 702, were actually indexed by the archives. And then there's an identification column or a description column on the far right that provides information about the photo identification. It gives an approximate date in most cases and a little bit about the provenance. What was the origin of the picture? How did Jack obtain it, or where did he obtain it? So if you look at a close up here, again, you see that the box is the first column, and it tells you if it's a flat box. If it doesn't say anything, it's an upright box. Then you see the folders, the number of the folder, and the photo number. And again, under the description here, you can see that the first image, photo number 1, is a guy named Charles Joseph Frechette. He was a scaler and a wood boss. The picture was from the Menominee Mills in Neopet, Wisconsin. It was dated 1930. The other thing about this is there's a range of dates on these pictures. I want to say some of the earliest pictures are in the late 18 or early, let's say 1880s, or as a general number. And then the majority of them are more in the 1910 to 1915 timeframe. And there's an occasional picture that's much more recent than that, something similar to the 1930 date. So most of the images are the descriptions will look like these first 3 or 4 that are shown here. You also will get some that don't provide the provenance and tell you where, how Jack got the postcard or the image, and it doesn't contain a date. And you can see that the top first 3 descriptions on this slide or this image shows 3 different images that don't have a date, and they don't have, well, the first one has provenance. The second 2 don't tell you where the pictures came from. So either Jack didn't write it down or it wasn't recorded on the back of the image. Now, because it's a Word document, it's really, really a very simple search technique. You open up a Word document, up in the upper right-hand corner, you see that area that's circled. You'll see a screen or a word that says find. If you click on find, it'll open up a navigation box over on the left, and you can type in any word you want and have it search the document to find that word. I started with Weyerhaeuser, and there's a couple of points I want to make about the name. But I typed in Weyerhaeuser, and you can see that it showed up in the index 9 times. And what it does is under the results, you can see that the word results over on the left underneath that red circle is highlighted, and it brings up a short or small synopsis of what the index says about that image. And then in the actual index itself, or in the document, it will go in and highlight the word so that it's easy for you to find. Now, Weyerhaeuser is unique because it shows up in several different images. But one of the things that's important when it comes to this, using this database or this index, is that it is not going to put words that are close together. So you've always got to search for one term rather than 2. If you're using a Google search, you can do, I want Weyerhaeuser and Wanigan, or Weyerhaeuser and Chippewa River, and it will pull up articles for both of those search terms. In this case, if the words aren't directly next to each other, you lose them. So here's an example. Well, I'll come back to this. Here's an example. It says Weyerhaeuser and Wanigan. I wanted to find out if there were any photographs of Wanigans that belonged to Weyerhaeuser. And Weyerhaeuser was big on the Chippewa River. And so I wanted to see if there was any specific images I could use of his. I typed Weyerhaeuser and Wanigan, and I got one result. And you can see that highlighted in the index. But I wanted to see how many images were there for just Wanigan. So I put in another search and did just Wanigan, and it increases the results. And I guess the thing that I think is important about using the search feature on a Word document that's a finding aid for images, as this one is that you want to use less rather than more terms. So you will get more results if you search just for Wanigan or search just for Weyerhaeuser than you will if you search for Weyerhaeuser and Wanigan together. Now, the other thing I wanted to do when I go through here is mention, and I use Mr. Weyerhaeuser as an example, is the index is fairly consistent. No, it is very consistent in the spelling of all the different terms. And so they use the Weyerhaeuser spelling that we're used to using for spelling his last name, but his last name is actually spelled two different ways. It's the American version versus the German version. And his first name, Frederick versus Friedrich, is also two different options that you could use to search a database for. In this case, again, less is more. You really want to conduct a simple search using just one name. So I used Wanigan as an example. I used Weyerhaeuser as an example. As we go through tonight and talk about the database or the finding aid here, you'll see that you can apply this to everything from mill to sawmills to paper mills and other things. You're better to search with one term than trying to link terms together when you're first starting out. If when you find a result or type in a search term in the navigation bar and you get too many results, it will not show them. So in this case, you see that right underneath the Weyerhaeuser Wanigan, you get one result. If you typed in something where there were more than 100 hits or matches, it will say that there are too many matches to display. It will highlight them in the text, but it will not bring them up in the results in the column on the left. So Wanigan, Tom mentioned that there was some connection to my family and early history connected to the logging. And I actually think about a Wanigan as being one of the things that got me interested in forest history. And it was not my immediate family, but a friend of the family. When I was about 22 or 23 years old, I was visiting an elderly neighbor, and she was going through pictures and showing me the pictures that she had from her family. And she grew up on the Big Plain River, and one of her uncles worked on a Wanigan. And she would tell me stories about these Wanigans coming down behind the log drives on the Big Plain River. And, you know, there's just something about it that kind of got me excited about the history of forestry and the stories that she was telling. And this isn't the picture she showed me that day, but it's one of the things that piqued my interest. And a Wanigan is one of those cool things connected to the forest history that's very unique and kind of special. And really what it is was a floating storage unit or storage shed or tent for tents, blankets, food for the men that were running the log drives. And the Wanigan usually came up from behind, and the logs went down first, and the Wanigan came down behind there. And then at night it would pull up, or when it was mealtime, pull up, and they would feed the crew. So if you're thinking about a Wanigan, it's always connected with a log drive. Last month, we had a webinar on the last log drive on the Wisconsin River. And one of the things that I've always looked for is, can I find a definite date for the last log drive on? You know, and each river had a different time when they stopped running the logs on the river. Last month, we were talking about 1912, and there are articles in the newspapers that talk about it's the last log drive from Brokaw down to Wausau in 1912. But when I was pulling things up about Wanigans, I run across this one from the Wausau Daily Herald, May 1st, 1924, talking about the annual log drive of the John Weeks Lumber Company. And again, it's still a log drive, and it's in 1924. But there did come a point where log drives were not allowed on our Wisconsin rivers, and gradually they disappeared. I think if I could go back and look at any one time, though, I would like to go back and watch a log drive going down the river, the Wanigans, and the way the men worked to bring those logs down the river to the mills. Another picture that I thought was a good one, and I'm using Weyerhaeuser pictures to start with here, is this one that was called the log drive, a Weyerhaeuser crew bringing up the rear on the Chippewa River about 1890. What I thought was important about this, there's a couple things I thought that were important about this picture. One is it's a reminder that, you know, the early logging really involved the rivers in Wisconsin. They were the highway for getting those logs downstream to the mills, and it took some effort, and it was part of the important history of log drives or of logging in Wisconsin history. Now, what I liked about this picture and why I selected this picture to talk tonight is because of the title, Bringing Up the Rear. And one of the things about log drives is there's actually a couple of different crews that make up the log drivers that took the logs down the river. The first crew was called the beat crew. And the beat crew was responsible for kind of watching places where logs might get stuck. They were the ones that were seen running across the logs while the logs are driving down the river or floating down the river. They were the ones that had the more dangerous jobs and the most experience in logging. And there was generally between 10 and 15 men involved on the beat crews on log drives. And it was their responsibility to get the logs or keep the logs flowing down the river to start with. This is the rear crew. That was the second group of people. The rear crew were the ones that were responsible for picking up the stragglers and pushing them back into the channel so they continued to float down the river. Now, the picture is small. I know you can't see all the details in it, but if you look along the shoreline, and I don't know if you can see my cursor, but oops, darn, I shouldn't have done that. Over on the far left-hand side, you can see a couple men standing with pike poles, and the pole men assisted the beat crew and the rear crew with pushing logs that got stranded on the shoreline back out into the water, and then the rear crew would push them out farther into the channel to get those floating down the river. Now, one of the things that's seemed to be inevitable when it came to log drives were that eventually there was a jam. Somewhere the logs got caught on a sandbar, or there was an obstacle in the river, and one would start backing up, and then another one would back up, and eventually there was a large number of logs backed up and blocking and damming the river, basically. This is a picture that's labeled log jam on St. Croix River, Polk County, Wisconsin, 1886. It's not the biggest log jam that ever happened in Wisconsin. That was in Chippewa Falls, but it's still a good sized one. There was over 200 million feet of wood, of logs piled up in this particular stretch or in this particular log jam. And I'm gonna read something to you because I think it's one of the cool things about a photograph. If you can narrow down a date, if you have a good description of it, you can go out and find additional information. So this log jam occurred in 1886. That's all the picture says. You can go for a search of newspapers, and you'll find that in June and July of 1886, there were 166 different newspaper articles talking about a log jam on the St. Croix River. And if you look, there's 200, and the story on the right, it's talking about the log jam in the St. Croix River being 200 million feet, board feet of lumber or of logs stuck there with a value of $2 million. And that it would cost about $9,000 for them to break that jam if they could. The other thing that was important about these log jams is, if you look at the headline, the working of breaking it up watched by thousands. And the newspaper article, that's the two longer columns, and I can't read it and you can't read it, is a story that appeared in a Minnesota, no, that was in Racine, but it was written by a Minnesota newspaper man. And I just want to read the last paragraph because he carries on a conversation with a woman who's sitting on the ledge of the river or the edge of the river watching this log jam. And he's getting hungry and he wants to go up to the hotel to get lunch. And she's kind of admonishing him that he should stay because they're going to break this logjam any minute and he'll miss it. And he goes on to write in the story, basically that her enthusiasm was admirable, but that he went and to the hotel, which was about five minutes away. And he was there. He had just been served soup, a sandwich, and some canned corn when he heard the cry, "The whole jam is moving." And then he goes on, "Billy the Kid himself would have been put to it to make better time than I did for the river's ledge. What a sight it was, for fully a quarter of a mile in length and 800 to 700 feet in breadth. The vast press and throng of the mob of giants were in furious motion. I could think of nothing but countless herds of frantic buffaloes leaping over one another and trampling one another underfoot. The irresistible avalanche of motion and terror from behind sweeping before everything to its front. Indeed, the tremendous jam, 30 to 50 feet in depth, was working perpendicularly up and down, as well as forward along all of its line. Whenever a temporary opening was made, enormous trunks that had been submerged deep down would leap up into the air and onto the backs of the others with precisely the motion so often witnessed in a herd of cattle. Meanwhile, the wrenching, straining, and groaning was such that it seemed as though the whole mass must be ground up into pulp for the paper mills. For perhaps 15 minutes, this striking scene lasted, when finally the vast body of logs became consolidated again into another jam. I think he has a good description there of what a log jam, breaking up of a log jam might look like. But I don't know that we can ever appreciate it because we'll never see that again. The effort that it took to break up a log jam and the fact that they would break one up and it would go a short distance and then it would jam up again. And I mentioned when I talked about the 166 articles, that's over the period of June and July. So it might break up, it go a little bit, and then form another jam and go on. So anyway, I started with things related to the river because that's where the Wisconsin forest history really started. We logged along the river. When the railroads came in, then we had the potential of moving logs from the camps and the woods to the towns and mills via rail. And again, I wanted to kind of mention, when you're searching for something, think in terms of small snippets. And so on the first search in the index, I did just rail, and there were 90 articles that popped up as rail. And you can see some of them show up as railroad. There's rail car in there, there's railway in there. It could be almost anything related to rail, but the less is more idea is what's important. When you do the railroad, you get a little bit more specific that you're talking about railroad. It might have to do with building a railroad. It might have to do with railroad ties. As you're using this index, you have to go through each of those descriptions and find out or see if you can find what you're looking for an image. And then the last one, railway, would be less commonly used. It has the fewest hits. And again, this is where you think about what exactly are you going to find, and then you can go into the index to find out what you're looking for. Tom, I don't know if you saw it, but Kieran Bargander or Baumgartner has raised her hand. And then when it comes to the rail related things, you can look for other terms than, okay. Tom, is there something working or not working?
Yeah, the chat function is not enabled, but at the end of the presentation, you can turn the mics on and I'll walk you through that.
Okay, all right.
I think that's what they're raising their hand about because I can't chat with them, so.
Okay, all right. So you also want to do this and look for specific terms related to the railroad. So if you're looking for an image, I picked trestle for an example of one. There are 10 images where the word trestle appears in the description for the images. If you want to do locomotives, you're talking about the engines on train, train engines, 33 of them. Or if you want to get specific, you can name a specific type of engine. And you can see here that it gives us only 4 for the Shea Lima type locomotives. Again, the database is really easy to search, and it's just a matter of searching in one term. And then I added a couple others just because I think I just wanted to try it. The Phoenix log hauler, and it's not technically a train, but it's kind of related. The locomotive is similar. And so there were 50 different images that showed up listed under Phoenix. And then I wanted to check for the Lombard log hauler, which seems to have been more used out in the east part of the country, Maine and Canada, New York. And so we have fewer results for that there. But one of the things that surprised me on this set of pictures was that there was an interior shot of the assembly shop of the Phoenix Manufacturing Company in Eau Claire. And so again, nice pictures, a variety of pictures, and nice quality pictures. And then there were 2 other pictures, just because I thought they were cool pictures I wanted to include tonight. The railroad trestles, as I mentioned, there were 10 different pictures of railroad trestles. This one is a trestle down at the dells of the Wisconsin River. And when I picked this picture, it was early on while I was going through the images and selecting images. I didn't grab one with wooden trestles, and there were several pictures that were older that I should have clipped or copied and used here too. But there's a nice selection of pictures, and it depends. If you're interested in railroads, you could look specifically for those things in the index or other things. The photograph up on the right-hand side of the image, the logging locomotive with flanged wheels, I just thought this was a cool picture of the locomotives that were used on logging pole roads. And you can see a good image of the wheels on the front of that locomotive for hauling the logs out of the woods. And that was our one picture from Ohio, by the way. And then there were pictures like this one that were in the collection that were also kind of neat pictures. And all of them are indexed as prized load. And what I remember about those loads, I learned from Malcolm Rosholt, and he referred to them as star load. And so I have the star load behind the back of the prize load word there. Anyway, this is a picture that's in the collection of Jack Vallier's photo collection at the archives. And it's also a picture that appears in the Lumberman of the Chippewa River that Malcolm Rosholt wrote, and it was on page 49. And what I thought was interesting here is the difference in the descriptions. In Jack's collection, it says there's 4-horse team pulling a prize load with inset photograph of a lumber baron. Obviously, the name wasn't known, and the picture that Malcolm used in his book lists the man. It's probably the man that's in the picture, but his picture doesn't have an inset in it. And so he goes in and describes the picture a little bit more. One of the things that Malcolm talked about in his books was that a lot of times these prize loads or star loads were loaded for the sake of a photographer who was trying to sell pictures. And what you would see is a sleigh piled high with lumber on it or wood on it. And then they would get as many people from the camp to pose on the picture with the hope of selling more pictures to the lumbermen in the camps. This particular load was supposed to be 19 feet wide and 24 feet high. And according, and I like the way Malcolm put this, he had said allegedly the 4 horses pulled this load for 3 miles. I highlighted it to kind of emphasize the allegedly. I'm not sure if they could have done that or not. He generally talked about the loads being about half of that were typically hauled by horses. And then there's some other photographs again. And the photographs, there was one picture after another that was kind of exciting. The picture on the left here is from a lumber yard in West Lumber Company up at Lugerville. And I just thought it was a great picture because of the perception, the depth that you can go through there. And you see that the stacks of lumber are kind of leaning a little bit. And that was done deliberately so that the water would drain off the top of the stack if it rained. The idea here was to allow the wood or lumber that had been cut to dry out. So there were spacers between each row. And it was just a nice, very neat, orderly stacking process. And regardless of what lumber yard you would go to or look at for pictures, they are always stacked nice and neat and very high. And it's not that space was precious, but the idea really was to stack them up so that they were up nice and high so the breeze would come through and help in the drying process. The picture to the right of that is identified with the title Morning Call to Cook Shanty with Meal Horn, circa 1920. And when I look at that, the first thing that pops to mind is that's a Gabriel horn. Gabriel horn is a tin horn about 4 or 5 feet long that they would blow to call the men for a meal. I don't know why it's not labeled as a Gabriel horn, but it wasn't. But it's, again, a typical picture from a logging camp with a Gabriel horn. And then in the upper right-hand corner is a really large cook shanty. And this one is from the Mellon Lumber Company in Ashland. And you can see that generally the rule was that you didn't talk to one another, but the photographer must have gotten the attention of all the lumberjacks eating breakfast that day because they're all kind of staring at him when they snapped the picture. I imagine that when the picture was done being taken, everybody went back to work. The idea was they wanted people to come in, eat, and leave. There was things to do, and the idea of eating and avoiding conversations and things kept a nice peaceful environment in there. And then the bottom picture has a group of men showing them decking logs here, and you can see that they've got a single chain going over the top of the pile. They're pulling the log up, kind of up to the top of the pile. One of the 2 guys up on the top must be the top loader, who would have been responsible for positioning that log on the top. And then you can see a sawyer down on the lower left. He's got his crosscut saw. The guy standing next to the pile with the stick is probably the scaler. He would be measuring the logs to see how many board feet of wood are in there. And then there's a couple people with cant hooks there who are probably responsible for moving the logs into position to put up on the next run for the decking. And then there were lots of pictures of mills, different mills. And what I noticed when I was going through the index on these was that you can manipulate your results by putting a space before and after. So you tend to think about a sawmill being 1 word, paper mill being 2 words. And so if you just put in the word mill or mills, you get every mill that shows up in the index. If you put a space after it, it eliminates the word mills. And so you can go just the mill and versus mills, plural, and get 56 results. Or if you put a space before it, it takes it away from the sawmill and gives you like a paper mill where you'd have a space before it, or the shingle mill up in the front. That would be included in those 23. So sometimes when you're doing a search in this index, you want to manipulate or play with how you're searching to get the to narrow down the results on your search. But again, nice quality pictures. We've got one in Wausau, one in Stanley, one in the Menominee River area. I think that was Neopet, and then another one from up at Shawano. Looking at the database, there are mills and entries for just about every community in the state except Marshfield, because I went down there specifically hoping to find some images for the Marshfield sawmills and things that were operating. And then two just neat pictures. One is the size of this circular saw blade. Circular saw blades were introduced in the state sometime about the 1850s. Before that, you had the up and down pulley saws that were being used. And I'm not exactly sure when band saws came into use, but the circular saw started being used in the 1850s. And just the immense size of it is one thing. And then I've got a couple boards here. When you look at the picture on the right, you see the first fruits of choice timber. Now, this is from the state of Washington, and you might say, well, the trees were bigger there, but I have seen examples of white pine cut in the early 1880s that were 3 feet, 4 feet wide and just single boards. And so I think this is very much possible that we could have found fresh lumber that were cut from old pines here in the state that look just like that picture. Then the other pictures that I thought were kind of interesting in the collection that I ran across, as Tom mentioned when he was doing the introduction, I do a lot of stuff in my family history. All the homestead papers that my family have proving up their claims for the homestead land talked about having built a log barn. And this is a good image of what a log barn might have looked like that a homesteader would have been building. And again, like any of the other pictures of log raising or barn raisings, you see everybody in the community or family probably came out to assist with the process. And then when we go over after the woods was cut, or the timber was cut, and the trees were gone, then we had families moving into the area to settle the land. And the picture up on the top is called In the Cutover, and it's a Scandinavian family from Elko, Wisconsin. The date is on there, but in this case, the family name was not on there. And then John Dietz, probably everybody remembers John Dietz and the Cameron Dam. And there was even a postcard in there for John Dietz. So I think one of the things that's important is that everybody knows there's a wide arrangement of photographs and really good quality images. All the pictures that I just shared with you were taken through the plastic. So if you'd taken time to take them out of the plastic sheets, you would probably have gotten even better images for whatever project you might happen to be working with. So the question becomes next is, how do you get hold of this collection or actually look at the collection yourself? The answer is the collection is housed at the UW Stevens Point Archives and Regional Archives. The address is 800 Reserve Street. Because they are in the process of taking down Albertson Hall, they're in a temporary location in the College of Natural Resources, Tainer Building. And the phone number is there, and as is the email address. Because they're in a temporary location, they are asking people to make appointments before they come and visit. All you have to do is call and ask, call or email and ask to set up a time. The archive is open Monday through Friday, 10 to noon in the morning, and then in the afternoon from 1 to 4:30. I would recommend, if you're going to go to look at the Vallier collection of photographs, you're going to want the 3.5 hours. You'd probably be better off going in the afternoon. But if you want to look at just specific things, you could send Brad an email, ask for the index. He would send it to you, and then you could go through and select specific pictures that you wanted to look for. All I can say is kudos to the archives, because they are great people to work with. And if if there's anything that you have a question about while you're there working with a collection or looking for, they will know how to answer or how to assist you to get that done. And that kind of talks or wraps up what I wanted to say about the Vallier collection. As far as the wrap up, I think it's important that the Stevens Point is centrally located in the state, so it makes getting to the collection fairly easy. As the original article said, the majority of the images are of Wisconsin, Upper Michigan, and Minnesota. While they said it probably contained 2,000 to 3,000 or several thousand, it's probably less than 1,500, but each of those images are unique and they're good quality. The finding aid is a great way of locating the images, and the staff is very supportive to helping and make things easier for searching. So if you're interested in the collection at all, I would recommend you reach out to them and access it yourself. Now, before I turn this over for questions, I wanted to put in a shameless plug. The Forest History Association has a traveling exhibit. It consists of 9 pull-up banners, retractable banners, the historical logging in terms of logging at the camps, in the forests, the mills, on the waterways as wood floats, from cutover to sustained yield, and Wisconsin World War II wartime products. The 9 panels make a great exhibit for county fairs, historical societies, libraries, and if someone is interested in hosting the banners for a while, they can reach out to the Forest History Association at our email address, the fhaw@gmail.com, and we can make arrangements for getting them to you for 2023. Right now, we've taken a couple reservations, and as the summer comes up, we'll have more things come up, but I thought we'd put a plug in tonight to give people a chance to know that they exist and that the Forest History Association is willing to share them with everyone. And with that, I will turn this over to Tom for questions.
All right, so Don, I'm gonna, well, first of all, like I said, the chat function is only working for us. It must have been a box not checked or something.
Oh,
So if you will use the raise hand function, then Don, when you click on participants, you should be able to highlight their name of the person who has the raised hand, and you should be able to turn their mic on. So click on participant.
Yep. You gotta remember, my mouse is giving me trouble tonight.
Oh,
all right. Joe, nope.
So you can see John Berg.
Attendees. Yeah, so okay. All right, John. John, go ahead. Oh, unmute John.
How's that? You hear me?
That works.
Yeah, you already answered my question. The question I had was, how do you access the index? Is the index available online, or do you have to call Brad Castleberry? And I think you have to call Brad, don't you?
I think you have to call Brad yet. I asked him to send it to me, and he sent it to me. You know, it was actually there before I got home. That's how I would do it. I would just reach out to Brad and say, I'd like to look through the index, and he'll send it to you so you can do that.
And that'd be online, right?
Well, you can reach out to him at the email address that I gave you there.
But I mean, he'll send it to you online?
Yes, he did.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Mary?
Oh, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right. Oh my goodness. I want to tell you how exciting this was to watch this, because that gave me such a wonderful idea of what it was like for our loggers who were up here from Nauvoo, Illinois, and what it was like for them, because there were no photos that were taken at that time. And there was not a lot of story that was, people will be so interested in some of these pictures and the things that you said. I absolutely loved it. It makes me feel so excited to see those things. Okay, a couple other things.
Go ahead, Mary.
Thanks, Don.
All right.
First of all, did the white pine need to be dried?
Well, they dried after lumber was cut, it always was dried. I don't know that the word need in there. I'm not sure quite sure how to explain it, but even today, when they cut timber or logs into lumber, it goes into a dryer.
And I know that, I know that they have to do that for the day, for today's, but when they were harvesting the timber back in the 1840s, they used that lumber, that timber right away to build what they were building down there. They didn't dry it at all that I know of. Okay. Another thing that I wanted to mention to you, you mentioned about the sawmills and the different kinds of saws. There are some original homes in Nauvoo that still have the log, the wood that was sawn in Black River Falls, and you can see the up and down marks from the sawmills. So cool to see that.
Yeah,
Okay.
actually, if you look at the logs that were cut, or the lumber that was cut back in the 1850s or 60s, you can tell by the saw kerf that's on the lumber pieces, whether it was cut with a muley saw, the up and down saw, or if it was cut with a circular saw.
So you call it the muley saw. Good. Okay. I did ask if the photos can be copied.
Yes, but you have to
okay.
do is just ask them or tell them what you're doing with them, and they can give you permission to copy them.
Okay, another thing, sorry. I absolutely loved the way you described and explained how people can find what they're looking for. You did an excellent job on that. That was just great.
Well, thank you very
This
much.
was a wonderful, wonderful presentation. Thank you very much.
Judy.
Is there any way for people out of state to call in and order specific pictures?
Brad, what I would do is I would reach out to Brad at the email address that I had on the talk. And he is just very accommodating, very helpful. If you tell him you're from out of state and you're looking for something in particular, I'd be willing to bet that he would help you.
Thank you.
Just a point of order, when you're done speaking, if you could click your mute button, just so we don't get background. Thanks. Go ahead, Don.
Tom.
Oh, Don, hi. Do you recall, is there any pictures from Langlade County? I had some ancestors that were cooks in camps around 1900.
There are pictures from Langlade County. To be honest, I'd have to go into the other room. The index is on my other computer. Something about the microphone is giving me trouble, so I'm away from that room right now. I can look if you want and send you a message of what I find.
And secondly, could you just comment on Malcolm Rolsh? I mean, I've seen various books. He sounds like he was a prolific author.
He did a lot of writing, and not just on lumbering. He has the book on lumbermen of the Chippewa River. He has 2 or 3 other books, and because you just asked me, I'm going to go blank here. But Malcolm Rauschel has written a lot of information about the history of Wisconsin, and I would I can put a list of some of his books into the next newsletter. He was also a forced history member for a lot of years, but he has a lot of information about different techniques of lumbering and things like that. Well worth the read for, if you can get a copy of a book from a library, well worth the reading.
Okay, thank you, Don.
All right, thanks, Tom. Colleen, I'm gonna ask you to unmute and then you can talk.
Yes, nice presentation, Don. Do you know if there are any photos of tanneries in the collection?
I don't remember seeing tanneries themselves, but I know there's several nice pictures of hemlock bark, the hemlock being removed from the trees, loaded onto train cars, loaded onto carts. I know there's pictures there specifically addressing hemlock, but I didn't scan any of those or take any pictures of those, but they are there. And if you want, I can check and send you an email too, if you want.
Thanks.
It was Colleen. What was your last name again? Matula.
Thank you.
All right.
I noticed that John Bates was on earlier, and I think he'd be also interested in tannery. So if you find anything, let's include him.
All right. Let's see. Who did I just ask?
I think
I know that we've got Karen in here yet, Bob Rush, and there was one other one. Okay, Karen, go ahead.
I was wondering if there's any, if there's anybody that's going to digitize these in order to have them available online at any time. Is there anything going on in that direction?
I do not know. And that would be another one of those questions that maybe Bob, not Bob, Brad could answer. And again, I think a lot of times when it comes to digitizing different things, it gets to be the cost that's involved with it. The Forest History Association is working on finding aids for things related to the Hall of Fame nominees. It might be a project like this would be worth considering also. But right now, I don't know of any plans to do that. I can ask Brad and maybe put something in a newsletter or something to let people know.
certainly the Forest History Association has funded several projects, and it's part of our archive mission at the archives there in Stevens Point. So maybe down the road, because I think it's not just only digitizing the photos so they can be available online, but probably more important to preserve them. Even stored the way they are carefully, they still deteriorate over time, and getting a digitized image is always a good idea.
Bob Rush.
Don, hi, an excellent job. I've been scribbling notes as rapidly as I can, and I've got 3 pages of notes. I have a request from your well. Would you please consider summarizing your suggestions, focusing on the way to do the searches that you recommended tonight, and putting that in written form?
I can try.
That would be great.
All right. And for those people who don't know Bob, Bob is connected to the Taylor County Historical Society, and they have a wonderful collection of photographs there also.
Well, thank you. Let me just mention something that others may want to use. When we founded the Rib Lake Group, we did not want to rival the Taylor County Historical Society. So what we did is we decided not to build a structure, not to have a museum, and all we ask people is to loan us material. And to date, we've had over 200 people that have loaned us collections, which we then scan and return, and it worked out wonderfully.
Well, thank you for that, Bob. Okay, Bonnie.
Oh, hi, Don. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. I did a little research before your presentation tonight, and I found out that Jack Vallier also published or put together a catalog of logging tools, which I believe is also at Stevens Point. Were you able to access that? Do you have any idea what's involved in that catalog?
I do not. Actually, Jack was involved with a couple different projects. I guess for that, I would talk to Brad also. And I don't know if the book is from Jack's personal collection or if it was something that was donated to the archives from the Forest History Association. But I know Jack worked on a couple of writing projects. He was a partner, a co-author to lumberjack lingo. LG Sorden wrote that one. And Jack was involved with that. And there's a couple other projects that he worked on. But I would start again with Brad and ask him about whether or not it's available at Stevens Point. And the other thing about the archives, if you're not from the central Wisconsin area, say you're up by Ashland, because the university is part of the regional archive system in Wisconsin, they can box things up and ship them to other locations. So I don't know that they do that with photographs, but you could ask Brad about that as far as books, and you could probably get access to that book at someplace closer to you than Stevens Point.
Okay, just a quick follow-up. If I'm not able to access that collection at Stevens Point or that catalog, what would your recommendation be for an online catalog of logging tools?
We actually have an Oshkosh catalog on the Forest History Association website. It's from 1911, and it includes a number of it's a lot of equipment. It's not just all specifically logging.
Sure.
There, and it's easy to access. It's a PDF that you can open up and page through, and it tells you what the things were used for. There's an image of it and how much it cost at the time.
Okay.
So that would be one place I'd look. The other thing is, are you from Wisconsin?
Yeah, I'm in the Appleton area.
Just go to your local library and talk to them at the adult reference desk and ask them to arrange an interlibrary loan for the book. You may not be able to get the archives copy, for example, but there will be a copy of that book somewhere in the state that would be able to be loaned through the interlibrary loan program.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Okay.
The other thing on tools is many of our logging museums have great displays of tools. The Menominee Logging Museum has some pretty nice tools. The Rhinelander Museum. So I'd encourage you to check out some of the museum. They may not have all the tools that were in a logging camp, but many of them, and that's even a neater way to see them because you're up close and personal rather than a photograph.
Okay, I don't see anybody else's hands.
I see Joe has his hand up. I don't know if you can unmute, but
And who is that?
Joe Hamelin.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, hi, Don.
Yeah.
I think my question has been answered.
Okay.
It was whether the policy allows you to come and make copies. And I guess that's what we would negotiate with Brad. Is that right?
Right, and I think as long as they're not making the copies, it may be free. I know that when the article was published that they talked about them being available to the public to use that way. I was just making these for this talk, and so I don't know if there was a special circumstance that way or not. I would talk to Brad, but I don't think there is, but I won't swear to it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
I see Judy has another question, I think. Her hand's going up and down.
Judy.
Thank you. Could you put Brad's contact back up again?
Oh, sure thing. We can try. It will be the last, one of the last slides, so.
Of course.
It's a good review of all the pictures.
There you go.
Archives at uwsp.edu.
That's it then?
He's a one-person show, so he'll answer that email.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for attending tonight. Again, if anyone has an interest in hosting our Forest History Association banners, just get hold of us through the email, thefhaw@gmail.com. And thank you for attending tonight.
Yeah. We're going to take a break in December. We'll be back in January. Watch our newsletter and website for the topic, unless you want to say what it is, Don.
Don't put me on the spot. What?
Don't worry about it. We'll be sending out an email. You'll get it. We send it to all our previous attendees, and so you can decide then. And we're probably don't have the schedule completely firmed up for next year. So, but we'll pick the programs up in January again.
Right. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Bye.